Now, don't get me wrong. I love the pick at 4-5. I think it was a really good pick. I'm A-okay taking. I just have to play devil's advocate because if somebody doesn't, he's going to be going in the second round by next weekend.
Yeah, that should not happen.
Yeah. It's fantasy draft season, so we're just going to hit you guys with one more mock draft before you go and you pick your teams and the fantasy season is underway. Today, Dave Kluge and I are joined by Theo Gremminger, the director of content at Player Profiler, and he brought along a partner, a buddy, Billy Muzio, director of operations at Player Pro. You guys have such like high profile, high ranking names over at Player Profiler. I feel like
we're just show guys, right? Like we're the show guys at Football Guys.
Video guy at Football Guys. That's my title. Billy, I mean, you were Fantasy Pros #1 draft ranker in 2021. So there's a little bit. There's finally someone on the show that our audience is gonna be like, okay, cool, I can listen to him. I get it now. So before we jump in here, let me tell you guys the parameters of the mock draft, where everyone's at. Billy is going to be at the 101. Dave, you're at the 105. Theo, you're going to be at the 108. I will bring up the rear at the 112. We got a basic PPR, single quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex. Lineup here with 3 bench spots. So Billy, let's just talk about this. First pick overall, you went with Justin Jefferson. I know you also like Jamar Chase very much this season with some big potential as the wide receiver 1. Now let's not even talk about your pick. Let's say both those guys are off the board. You're at pick 3. Who are you going with here?
I think it depends on the format. If you're in a tight end premium league, I think a real argument can be made for Travis Kelce at the 103. I typically like to lean towards Tyreek Hill at this spot over Christian McCaffrey, over Cooper Kupp. So I think Tyreek Hill is probably the correct answer at the 103, just like his explosiveness, like what Miami's able to do with this team. Looks like they're trying to add another weapon with Jonathan Taylor right now. We'll see if it happens. But we saw what Tyreek Hill was able to do last year with Tua on this team and Waddle, and this combination, this duo wide receiver core, probably the best in the league, in my opinion.
All right, so after that, we see Jamar Chase, number 2, Christian McCaffrey, number 3, Travis Kelce went number 4, and then Dave, you went Cooper Kupp here with the number 5 pick, who Billy, I mean, it's like you weren't even paying attention. Billy literally just said he would go with Tyreek Hill over him, and instead you go Cooper Kupp over Hill, Eckler, Bijan. I'm going to hit you with what's Tim Robinson? You sure about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've remained steadfast in my approach all offseason that Cooper Kupp should be the 103. And we've talked about a lot, like these top 5, when you're looking at Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. You can kind of shuffle the deck anyway with those 5. And I wouldn't scoff at anybody for taking Kelce 101, Kupp 101. All these guys bring different skill sets to the table, but they all have fantasy's #1 scorer in their range of outcomes. So for me, what it comes down to with Kupp, we know that the injury is behind him now. And you were able to buy the dip, getting him at 107, 108, a couple of weeks ago. But now, with him back to 100%, seems like Stafford is healthy and ready to go as well. Cooper Kupp has scored 30-plus points in 32% of his games in PPR scoring dating back to 2021. I mean, this guy has a sky-high ceiling and a sky-high floor, so I would have taken him as early as 103, more than happy to take him at 105.
Okay, so right after that, we see Bijan Robinson come off the board at the 106, Tyreek Hill 107, and then Theo, you ended up with, I think, probably one of the better values here in the first round with Austin Eckler at the 108. Now, I know Bijan Robinson is one of your guys. So let's say you're just here in the middle of the first round, right? Same format, PPR, 2 running backs, the whole shebang. And you're looking at some of these guys that tend to go in the middle of the first. Travis Kelce, Austin Eckler, Bijan. Who are you going with there?
I think that you can kind of build your team out however you want this year. It's a lot of flexibility. I've actually had a couple of Amon-Ra St. Brown starts where I've pushed him up because I love Amon-Ra St. Brown this year. I think that he's the kind of guy that could give you, potential wide receiver 1 overall season, and you can get him in the back half of the first round. But Austin Eckler is a very safe pick. I think that there's a little bit of a worry that he goes from like the 100 catch guy to like an 85 catch guy with the improvements they've made at wide receiver and potentially pushing the ball downfield a little bit more. But you're talking about a guy that finished as RB1 overall last year, could have had 2 straight years of RB1 overall. He's just been so locked in, such a big part of that offense. So I'm really kind of open to different approaches. I do love Bijan Robinson. I haven't had to make too many Bijan versus Austin Eckler decisions. A lot of times I've gotten Bijan Robinson towards like the very tail end of the first round. But I think that there's kind of a nice tier where if you're picking somewhere between like this 108, 109 down to the 112, you walk away with two, dynamite players at the back end of the first round. I actually wonder if being in the back half of the first round is going to end up being the place you want to be when it's all said and done and we're looking at fantasy championships at the end of the season.
Yeah, 'cause I think there is a pretty big fall off in the middle of round 2. So I do like picking at the back half. And this time of year, we kind of like micro analyze everything and we start nitpicking all of these things about Austin Eckler, his age and, the new offense and how things could change there. But we're probably just overthinking it at this point because he's one of the few workhorses in the NFL. He gets a ton of targets, he gets a ton of goal line work. There really isn't any reason not to like Eckler. So I think that was one of the best values in the first round there.
Yeah, and we've seen, over the last 10 years, the RB1 overall has averaged 80 plus catches. So even if he takes a step back from, what we saw last year, he's still going to be right in that mix in terms of receiving ability and the ability to put up a monster game, when you need it towards the, fantasy championship weeks.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing here is that top half of round 1, there's so much ambiguity because I think as we look at all these players, we keep saying, oh, you can make the case for this guy going 1, this guy going 2 here and there. Really, I mean, what you end up seeing though is these players with just great value. Like you mentioned, even Eckler in this instance going at the 108, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who could be a potential wide receiver 1 overall type guy. They end up falling to you in this back half of round 1 on that turn of round 2. So, I mean, let's see what we ended up with here. Saquon Barkley goes the 109, Stephon Diggs the 110, CeeDee Lamb at the 111, and then on the turn here, I don't know why I did it in this order, but I did. Nick Chubb and Tony Pollard. In reality, I would have gone Pollard first. Now, I started with the very rare nowadays in fantasy football, double running back build, running back heavy build early. Billy, I know that you and I both like Tony Pollard. I'm curious about your thoughts, though, on Nick Chubb. This is the guy that I guess I accidentally clicked at 112. I would have gone 201. But is he like someone that you think actually gets the insane workload that people are expecting?
So real quick, I like that you took Chubb first and you drew Tony Pollard's ADP down. That's like next level drafting stuff. That's what I like to do in these draft streets. It's like I'm going to lower this guy's ADP by 1 spot today. And so that's a sneaky move that we always do in drafts. That being said, I do think Chubb is going to see a significant bump in overall workload this year. He's my RB6 right now in the season. With every update I've done, he's kind of rotated in between 4, 5, and 6. That Henry, Bijan, Chubb kind of tier in itself has been kind of swapping places with a lot of the updates. I don't think that he's ever going to see this massive pass down roll that we would love to see from Chubb. We know that Kareem Hunt was kind of that thorn in his side for years. He's got Jerome Ford now. They just went out and acquired Pierre Strong. I think that we can safely say that Chubb will probably always be a 20 to 30 catch kind of guy at best, and I don't think we'll ever see him in that 40 to 50 target range that we were hoping to see at some point in his career. I haven't projected for about 5.5% target share, which is 30 targets and 23 receptions, 23.5 to be exact. But I do have him for a significant amount of rushing share, so about 54%. It's about 265 rushing attempts, and it might even be low. This is a mean average. It's not a ceiling projection. So when I do these projections, I look at means and I try to stay within those kind of middle tier kind of ranges. I did give him about 1,300 yards plus and 11 touchdowns. So really like Nick Chubb this year. I would love to see him get a little bit more receiving down work, but I think we'll be happy with his output in 2023.
No, we're so thirsty for NFL news this time of year that like Pierre Strong got traded to Cleveland and everybody started firing off hot takes. Does that change your projections like at all for Nick Chubb? Like, is Pierre Strong going to be anything more than like a 5-10% snap player in this offense?
No, I love Pierre Strong's tape. Loved him coming out of college. I hated the landing spot. Like he was one of my most owned late round draft picks last year. Like when I'm talking about early drafts, like when we're drafting in like pre NFL draft, we're drafting in like March and April. Going into the NFL draft for that early best ball tournament. I think the realism here is that they traded him because I don't think that this is a tricky one because I don't necessarily think that Belichick would trade someone away that he thought was great. And so I think that they were either 1, unsatisfied with where he was at in his role, or 2, they saw some sort of overlap with what Ramondre Stevenson and Zeke were both doing in this offense, and knew that they could get something out of nothing for him and pulled the trigger. That being said, it's interesting with Cleveland because we know that Jerome Ford was not a pass catching down back inside of college, where maybe he's able to develop that skill in the NFL. Pierre Strong was able to catch the ball in college, and so he could potentially step into a pass catching role here for Cleveland. On the flip side, though, Cleveland has been enamored with Ford in this offseason, and the hamstring set him back. But word out of the street was that they loved this kid and that he was going to play a significant role. And we saw that by them holding him out of the first preseason game. And so that's kind of that reinforced belief. It's hard to put, a label on what it's going to be the first couple of days after the trade. But if I had to assume, I think that probably week 4, week 5, he probably takes over the pass down role because he's electric and has the ability to kind of take it to the house at any given time. And so I think he'll earn that role eventually, and he'll probably have to get eased into things. But I do expect him to be the pass catching down back by the end of the season.
Yeah, he's one of those names that like a lot of casual fantasy players probably don't even know who Pierre Strong is, but like us nerds, we love him because like his metrics are off the charts, catches a ton of passes, super fast. So I know we're all still holding hope, and maybe just because we've been stashing this guy on our dynasty benches for the last 2 or 3 years.
So I guess I gave you like the longest winded answer to say yes. I think he does take on a good role
All right.
Cleveland, but
and the 18th round underdog bailout for all the Pierre Strong.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
We love it. We love it.
Billy, you mentioned that you've got Nick Chubb projected for at least for 30 targets. Both the times that he has finished as a top 8 PPR running back, he's had at least 30 targets. So I think that's something that fantasy managers can expect again this year. He may not have that like RB1 overall upside because of that lack of passing volume, but I think he ends up being one of those safer guys that you're drafting there on that 1-2 turn. Now, before we keep going here and we finish up this mock draft, I want to ask you guys, please, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you can get all of our preseason content that we're going to be bringing you. And then once the season starts, guys, we're like, what, Dave, what day is it? Are we like a week and a half away, a week away, 2 weeks? How long until NFL football?
9 more sleeps. That's it.
9 more sleeps. I like that you put it 9 more sleeps because Dave needs some sleep right now. 9 more sleeps until NFL football. And once that happens, we're going to be bringing you guys this show nearly every single day of the week. So be subscribed to the channel. Make sure you're getting all of your Football Guys content, and be sure to comment down below of maybe your favorite or least favorite picks. Maybe you think that Billy and Theo are just so smart. Thanks for bringing them on. Dave still kind of sucks. So maybe, start to rotate in some more guests. I don't know, but leave that comment. And, let's get to round 2 through 4 here. Okay. We're going to pick up the pace just a little bit. I started out with the 2 running back build, and then I kind of, even things out, went a little bit more balanced with 2 wide receivers here. I got Keenan Allen, who's my wide receiver 15. I got him as the wide receiver 17 in this draft. And then Calvin Ridley, who is my wide receiver 16. I got him as the wide receiver 18 in this draft. This is interesting because I think that these are guys who are potentially both the wide receiver 1s on high profile offenses. I want to hear it actually from Theo here. What do you think so far? Be honest with me. I think I have 2 top 6 running backs on this roster and 2 potentially top 12 wide receivers going here. How do you like this start for Team Brown?
I liked your team. I definitely liked your start. I think that Ridley's super interesting because I think that they have big plans for him. Everyone's treating him like he's the alpha there. We certainly like Trevor Lawrence. I do worry a little bit about a guy missing time and then coming back once it comes on. But he certainly looks good in the preseason. And Keenan Allen though was the pick that I loved because Keenan Allen in that range, Alfredo, like Keenan Allen when he came back last year from injury was playing at such a high level. And in this draft, you got him at the 312. I've started to see him go, towards like the 301, 302 area, especially in a lot of these high stakes drafts, because we love this Chargers offense. And I think he's going to be in that CeeDee Lamb role with Quentin Johnson and Mike Williams potentially canceling each other out slightly. But when Keenan Allen's on the field, he's one of the safer big target guys in the NFL. It's a guy that Justin Herbert's going to lean on. The only, he's 32 years old is the only thing that's a little bit concerning, but he hasn't shown any sign of drop off, and his game is suited to kind of age gracefully. So I liked the Ridley pick, but I loved the Keenan Allen pick. And I think when you go running back to get Keenan Allen, after is really like solidifies it, because I think that he could end up putting up, the kind of numbers you're seeing for some of these wide receivers being selected in the back end of the second.
So yesterday in my home league draft, and I know we're not supposed to talk about our drafts, but that's why I'm so tired. My flight home got canceled. I got about 3 hours of sleep last night when I was out in Chicago drafting. But let me ask you guys totally selfishly, because I was on the clock and I was torn between Keenan Allen and Calvin Ridley. And I have these guys back to back in my rankings. And, I'm supposed to be the analyst here that has like a strong take, and I cannot decide between these two. I ended up going with Keenan Allen, but I have a little tinge of regret today. I'm not sure if I made the right call there. So who would you guys prefer between Keenan Allen and Calvin Ridley? Do you have a strong stance between the two?
Give me Keenan Allen. Like Billy's probably Billy's say the same thing. I'll say you also get the fact that he's going behind Ridley, so you don't have to use that. Like, we're seeing Ridley steam up so high, and Allen's going behind him. I'm going to go with Keenan Allen on this one. I do think that there's a chance that Ridley could have more touchdown catches this year, but in terms of total targets, in terms of total catches, which are the things that I think we can kind of accurately predict, I'm going with Keenan Allen in both categories.
Yeah, to me, it's not even close. Like, I really like Keenan Allen. You love every facet of his game. He's always commanding a large target share. I have major concerns about Calvin Ridley, and people have heard me talk about this on our podcast week in, week out, but he's missed a year and a half of football. Like, people just automatically go to he missed last year. It's like, no, he left, like a few weeks into his 2021 season because of his mental health concerns. And so he hasn't seen the field in a year and a half. He's now, about to be 29 years old. He's in a new offense with a new coach, with a new system. There's a lot of chemistry concerns, right? And yes, it looks like he's picking it up quick and he's making all the right moves and he's getting up to speed with the team. But anytime you miss this amount of football, we've never seen it work out for a player. You could look at Deshaun Watson last year. You can look at Le'Veon Bell, was the last one prior to that. And so there is some concerns for me, and we've seen him steamed up in drafts. I saw him go at like the 2-7 the other day in the FFPC. And it's like, I'm just out at that point. He went as a top 12 wide receiver. And I think that it's probably within his range of possibilities, but at the ceiling, because he's only eclipsed the 1,000 yard mark once in his career. And that was in 2020 after Julio Jones got injured. And he was like the de facto only target on the team. Then from there, he's never eclipsed since that year. He has yet to eclipse 900 yards at any point in his career. He's never eclipsed 100 targets at any point in his career. And he's never once had over 100 receptions, 90 in his best year. Yep. So people are literally drafting him at a ceiling this year, in my opinion, and relying on that, 7 to 10 touchdown range, because he's not going to see it in overall targets. We're not going to see another 143 target season like we did in 2020 when he was the only option. So I think he's steamed up past his ceiling, and I have a lot of concerns about him.
That was very much so my early offseason take. And then I feel like the FOMO got the best of me. And I was just like, all right, well, he's looking good in camp and he's getting steamed up draft board, so I better draft him now. So I started drafting him a little bit when he was like in the middle, late third round. But yeah, now with him going at the 2-3 turn, middle of the second round, that's way too rich for my blood.
Yeah. And the underdog, he steamed past DK Metcalf, and then now he's steamed past T. Higgins. So
yeah,
he's rising and rising up in underdog.
So after that pick, by the way, Theo, you're welcome back anytime for saying I had good picks. Billy, maybe. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Really sucks. No,
after that, Theo, let's take a look at your next 3 picks that you had here. You end up going Garrett Wilson at the 205, which that has been something that I think a lot of drafters are getting used to, which is seeing Garrett Wilson go ahead of Davante Adams. And in many cases, rightfully so. I think there's a lot of concerns there with Davante Adams. After that, you end up with Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a running back that both Dave and I love, and then Christian Watson at the 405, who that is one of my breakout wide receivers. I've been very high on Watson, and I think that a lot of the argument is, oh, he's so volatile. Everything last season was touchdowns, but there's a lot of good peripheral numbers and metrics that back up that he could still be a big-time contributor this year. So what do you say to someone who's saying, man, you really reached for Christian Watson in the middle of round 4?
I think that Christian Watson, I'd be comfortable taking a few picks earlier in this. I think we're talking about a guy who could have double-digit touchdowns, 1,200 plus yards. And it's funny because, the touchdowns are unsustainable crowd hates Christian Watson. But if you just watch the tape, Like, he runs away from NFL defensive backs. He looks like a difference maker out there. And he was also able to come in and show this for a decent range of games. I mean, he was putting up top-notch numbers for about 9 weeks of the NFL season. And this is a guy that also came from a small school. And a lot of times those smaller school guys take a little while to get acclimated. And he certainly didn't look like he needed any time. So he's a little bit older as well, which I like. You know, you're talking about a guy that's 23 and a half in year two, which is, you know, a little bit older than some of these other second-year wide receivers. And when you look at his target competition, like Alfredo, we've podcasted before, and we both like Jaden Reed, and Romeo Doubs is certainly on the roster, and Luke Musgrave as well. But the only target competition there in terms of wide receivers and tight ends is guys that are in their first or second year. And I think Christian Watson stands out. He's a lot different than those guys. He's an alpha type wide receiver, and I think he could put up wide receiver one numbers. Billy and I have talked about him for many, many weeks on First Class Fantasy. This is a guy that we've drafted a ton of. I love getting him in the fourth round, especially with a Jerry Jeudy injury, which was a guy that I think was going right in this range with Watson for me. Watson stands out even more. So I'm thrilled every time I get him in the fourth.
All right. So after that, Dave, you end up going Derrick Henry in the second over Jonathan Taylor, which I think has become the norm, right? T. Higgins over Jahmyr Gibbs, which was surprising to me, David. We might talk about that for a second. And then, of course, and I'm just even going to go ahead around extra here. You get the Justin Fields, DJ Moore stack, which, duh. I'm not surprised by that.
Keep it on brand, right?
Yeah. Very helpful for the audience. So what I want to talk about here is the T. Higgins over Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs has been a guy that you've been steaming up all offseason. To see you take T. Higgins, to me, that shows that you have a pretty good level of conviction on Higgins this season.
Yeah, I mean, Higgins has been a top 12 wide receiver for me all year. We've talked about it a lot, where a lot of people are putting Chris Olave ahead of him. I really like T. Higgins and Devonta Smith because they have standalone value where they can give you top 10, top 12 numbers every single week. And then, God forbid, if something happens to Jamar Chase or to A.J. Brown, then you've got that contingent upside as well, where they're the wide receiver one with a very good quarterback on a great offense. So Higgins has been a priority target for me all offseason. You know, I do like Jahmyr Gibbs, but having gone with Derrick Henry in the second round, I didn't want to start with two running backs with my first three picks. So that was really
an idiot does that.
Right. I mean, I think that Jahmyr Gibbs is a great football player. We've talked about him a ton already this offseason. I just wanted to get another wide receiver because they do start to dry out pretty quickly once you get into the fourth round. So I wanted to make sure I had at least two wide receivers with my first three picks.
Also, you mentioned people are taking Olave over Higgins. I'm people. Billy is also people, because when we take a look at his picks here, at the 212, he takes Jalen Waddle. At the 301, he took Chris Olave. And then Billy, this is a guy who now all of a sudden has exploded on Twitter and social media, and everyone's like, wait a second, this running back's still good? Like, what's going on? Dameon Pierce is the running back you took at the 412. The usage here in the preseason looks like he could be a workhorse back for Houston, that Devin Singletary is just being relegated to a backup role. Is he a guy that you're actively targeting in this range when you're in fantasy drafts?
Yeah, I went through phases drafting him where I was really high on him like early in the process and kind of backed off it a bit as I balanced out ownership throughout my drafts, and then added in a little bit of Singletary, and then realized that it was a mistake and kind of went back to the well of drafting Dameon Pierce. I was wrong on him last year as an analyst. I underprojected him. I did not think he was going to be as good as he looked inside the NFL. And last year he looked great. I mean, he was running hard. He was just running people over. He was also catching passes. I did not expect him to have the season that he had last year. I mean, 13 games, he had 939 rushing yards, 220 attempts, and 30 receptions. And so I think that if we can see him for a full season, we're talking about 1,000 yards. We're definitely talking about 30 to 40 receptions, and we're expecting this offense to be a little bit more improved as well. We know that their receivers have some concerns as well. The tight end is probably going to lead the team in targets, but I think Pierce has every opportunity to kind of insert himself into that receiving role. I think Singletary will be there. It's going to be a little bit of a nuisance at times, but I think that Dameon Pierce is pretty clearly the number one and going to get the bulk of the carries. So I really like him in 2023. I'm adding him back in the mix to kind of balance out the ownership the final 2 weeks of drafting season.
So I'm a wet blanket. This is what I do. Like every time somebody
We
starts getting
know.
hyped up and steamed up, it's just my job to just kind of like throw some sand on the fire. And I think the one thing with Dameon Pierce, like I completely get it. Like I have moved him up in my draft rankings, and like on film, it's impossible to ignore how fun he is and the way that he just trucks through people. But what concerns me is if you look at the first half of the season last year, he was averaging 84 rushing yards, 14 receiving yards, and almost 5 yards per carry. Second half of his games, it dropped to 62 yards per game, 12 receiving yards, and 3.8 yards per carry. So that's what concerns me a little bit, is just that we saw him start to wear down a little bit, loses efficiency, wasn't quite the same player on the back half of the season as he was in the front half. So I guess that's the main concern I have with him is like, yeah, he looks really good right now in the preseason, but how's he going to look in week 10, week 11, week 12 when we saw that workload start to wear him down a little bit last year?
Yeah, I think that's why they added Singletary, was they probably saw it as well. I mean, his opportunity share was at 73.8%, which was number 6 in the league. I don't think you want that from your back, every given week where you're seeing, 20 plus touches and it is going to wear someone down, especially when you're expected to take on both the rushing and the receiving role. Your body's not getting a break. So I think that they added Singletary in there to give him a little bit of a breather. I don't think it's going to, eat into his overall workload. He's not this back that's like way steamed up my projections. Like I have him as like a top 22 back. And so I have him at, 220 carries. I have him for about 8% of the target share. So I'm kind of maybe slightly below like steamed up inside the projections, but I think he's going to be pretty solid all year.
Now, don't get me wrong. I love the pick at 4-5. I think it was a really good pick. I'm A-okay taking Dameon Pierce there. I just have to play devil's advocate because if somebody doesn't, he's going to be going in the second round by next weekend.
Yeah, that should not happen.
Yeah. All right. Well, as you guys can see, we have been doing this mock draft here on Sleeper. And Sleeper, we talk about it every week. That's where Dave and I have all of our fantasy leagues. And Sleeper has become the fastest organically growing fantasy platform in the world with over 5 million active users in 2022. And now they've introduced Sleeper Picks. It's a real money product that connects friends over picks. You can choose 2 to 8 of your favorite players from pregame, live, or even across different sports. And you can pick more or less than the predicted stats that are there in the app for you. And only on Sleeper can you get up to 100 times payouts. So share with your friends, get rewards together, and head on over to sleeper.com/promo/FBG. Or if you're not an expert listener that can just recount all that, go ahead and just click the link in the description down below and make your way on over to Sleeper. Gents, let's move on over to rounds 5 through 7. Billy, I'm going to continue with you here, okay? We're going to go left to right like a book on this draft board. And you ended up here with Miles Sanders, Mike Williams, and Rachaad White. Now, you don't have to go through each of those players, right? But out of those 3, Sanders, Williams, and White, who is your favorite pick out of these 3 and why?
I'm pretty high on Miles Sanders this year. And I think it's finally that he's away from a rushing quarterback, because we saw his production in the receiving game just tank after they started Jalen Hurts. His rookie year, he had 50 receptions. Now, I'm not expecting 50 receptions, but I think it's within the realm of possibilities. After that point, once the Eagles actually started Jalen Hurts, he went to 28 receptions, 26 receptions, and 20 receptions. So I would expect to see his pass catching role kind of reinserted here for Carolina. We know they lack offensive weapons in the receiving core as well, and he's a back that it could handle 220 to 240 carries. So really like Miles Sanders this year. I think he's a true workhorse, and I think he's going to be given that third down back opportunity again, which clearly puts him inside the top 20 at the position in my projections.
Does the rookie quarterback thing ever worry you? I know like that's something that, depending on the position, sometimes just gets overblown. Does that worry you at all when you're projecting out Miles Sanders? How does that affect things?
With the running back, no, not as much, because they're going to be that outlet for the rookie quarterback, right? Rookie quarterbacks and inexperienced quarterbacks, they typically favor the tight end, the slot receiver, and the running back. So it's definitely going to hinder the field stretcher, if anything, right? So the DJ Sharks of the world, if he had a hamstring right now, but the ones that are going to be running 40, 50 yards down the field, that's who it's going to be affecting the most. When you have a back that's going to be able to be that outlet in the slot or the flat, or you have a tight end running across the middle of the field, that's where those inexperienced quarterbacks typically aim for and lean. And so I think that it's actually going to favor Miles Sanders this year.
Now, Dave, you have categorized yourself as a wet blanket, so I'm going to let you just kind of take on that role fully here and just metamorphosize, if that's a word, into a full wet blanket here. You took Isaiah Pacheco, Marquise Brown, Antonio Gibson. Blanket yourself. Least favorite pick out of these guys and why?
I mean, I think these were all very smart,
Shut up.
savvy picks. They were all just great value falling into my lap. Worked
I
with
knew
the
you were
build I
going.
had going. Really though, I mean, I've talked about Marquise Brown a lot, and I think one of my favorite reasons for liking Marquise Brown is what I've talked about is him being kind of that late season hammer if and when Kyler Murray returns. Well, Kyler Murray's return is looking bleaker and bleaker by the day. We don't know if he's coming back at all. On top of that, there's this fire sale right now happening in Arizona. So I don't even know if Marquise Brown is going to be on the Cardinals week 1. I mean, he could end up getting traded somewhere else. So all of the things that I really like about Marquise Brown are true right now. At this moment, he is the clear top dog in an offense that's going to be playing from behind, and he could see 10 plus targets per game. I don't care who those targets are coming from, if it's David Blau or Colt McCoy or Clayton Tune. If you're seeing 10 plus targets, that's a guy I want on my team. But if he gets traded to Denver, if they're trying to patch up the Jerry Jeudy injury, or if he ends up in Washington with Terry McLaurin getting injured there, then all of a sudden that target share disappears and he's not nearly as valuable. So Marquise Brown is a guy that I've really been aggressively targeting all season, and I've talked about it ad nauseum on this show, but I am starting to get a little bit concerned with the actions that the Cardinals are making.
Yeah, maybe they just send him to New York, let him work the slot a little bit with all the other small, fast guys that got there. It just seems so unbred for them. All right, speaking of New York, Theo, up here, you went with Darren Waller, who came off the board as the tight end 6, then Deontay Johnson as the wide receiver 27, and James Cook as the running back 31. I think all of these guys arguably pretty good values here in this draft. If you have to pick one between Waller, Deontay, and James Cook, which one of these guys do you think ended up being your best draft day value and why?
For me, it's Darren Waller. I think Darren Waller is going to challenge for tight end 2 overall. I don't think he'll catch Mark Andrews, but I think he'll be close enough to him that it'll be a little bit of a race. And you're talking about a guy who landed into a perfect situation. You talked about all the, the smaller slot types that they have at the wide receiver spot. I think Darren Waller is going to be their featured receiver. I think he'll lead them in targets. One of the things that Billy and I always kind of talk about with our tight end evaluations is we want tight ends who have a reasonable shot at leading their teams in targets. I think we would all bet on Darren Waller doing that. And we're talking about a guy who last year had, somewhat of a disastrous season, for what he's done the previous 3 seasons, but he still finishes as tight end 10 last year. We're only a few seasons removed from a 17 point per game tight end season from Waller. I don't think he's going to get quite there, but I think he could knock on the door of 14.5, 15 points per game. And I think that from the tight end position, that's a huge difference maker. And you talk about Brian Daboll hasn't really had a guy like this, a true move tight end. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested to see what Brian Daboll has schemed for him. The last time Brian Daboll went out and made a big offseason move was to get Stephon Diggs. And Stephon Diggs ended up being a league winner that season. We were drafting him as like a wide receiver 3. And he ends up finishing as a top 3 wide receiver. I think Darren Waller, this is going to be a massive year for him. And I like this Giants offense a lot. And I think that Waller's going to be a huge piece of it.
Alfredo, I think Theo must have listened to Monday's show because you just said everything about Darren Waller that Alfredo said that he loved about Darren Waller. He's one of our favorite picks this year too.
Awesome. Yeah. And Billy's all over him as well. We took him together. We had a main event draft the other night, and we took him in the 3rd round of tight end premium. So we're all in. We're all in.
He's my tight end 3 this year. Yep, and I mean, the only reason I can't move him higher is because Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce are who they are. But yeah, trying to get Darren Waller on as many teams as I can. And I would say you crushed this part of the draft, Theo, because I think Deontay Johnson is another. Like Darren Waller's up there, in my opinion, as one of the most mispriced players in drafts this year. And I think Deontay Johnson is as well. Like even if Deontay Johnson just had like 3 or 4 touchdowns last year, I think he'd be going 2 rounds higher than he is right now. But people got so burned by him last year. It is so statistically improbable for him to do what he did last year and not score a touchdown. He had like almost 30 red zone targets last year and couldn't convert 1 into a touchdown this year. So all he's got to do is regress slightly positively in the touchdown department this year, and he's going to smash his ADP. So those were my 2 favorite picks of the draft, where you getting Deontay and Waller back to back.
And Pittsburgh was also dead last in touchdown passes as a team. So there's a lot of things to like about Deontay Johnson. He's had at least 5 touchdown catches in every previous season of his career until last year's goose egg. If he can get back to that level, with the 140 targets we can expect for him, then I think he's a smash pick in this range.
Can we start a movement on this podcast instead of talking about regression when we're talking about positive stats? Can we talk about progressive, please?
Change the game.
Regression instead of positive regression.
Yes, please.
I mean, I've been told. I've talked to people that are much smarter than I. I've talked to JJ Zacharyson and Jordan McNamara about this, and they both say that regression is moving either positively or negatively. I used to be a
returning to the mean
guy, but I'm going to defer to people that are smarter than me in that category.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I've always this term has always like just kind of irked me. I'm like, it's
an
you gotta look
oxymoron. Jumbo shrimp,
Yeah, not a lot of smart breakdown on this podcast, but that's why we bring Billy and Theo here to just bring some of the intelligence up quite a bit. Let's finish up right here with my final 3 picks for 5, 6, and 7. I went Trevor Lawrence here to stack with Calvin Ridley. I think there's some big potential there with the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Drake London, who's one of my favorite breakout wide receivers for this year, and then Jordan Addison there in the 7th at the 7-12. So one thing I do want to talk about, guys, is and Billy, I'll throw this to you first, is stacking quarterbacks with their top receiver or top pass catcher, right? That's something that you typically see often in tournaments and best ball and big fields. You don't see it as often in home leagues. Is that a strategy? Like, do you care about that strategy at all when you're in a smaller league of 10 or 12 teams?
I think it's less important, but I do think that stacking is important, and I think correlation is important at all times. But it's just less important when you're only trying to beat 11 people versus underdog has 677,000 people in the field, and so you need the stacks in order to separate yourself from the rest of the field. And so I think that there is a time and a place for it. I do think that people overblow stacking and they drop tiers inside their drafts, and it ends up hindering their teams in the end. So I think that there's a time and a place for it. I think that you should absolutely do it, but in confined leagues, I think it's less important.
Now, the middle rounds, this is where you really win your drafts. And we each took some players with major breakout potential, and we're going to dive into those players over in the audio version of the show. And I'm going to be honest, I think, in my opinion, 9 out of the 12 players that we selected with these next picks, all have potential league-winning production in them. And I think these are the guys that could really shape or break a fantasy football team. So if you want to get that full episode, click the link in the description down below. Head on over to the audio version of this show. This has been awesome. It's been great to have you guys on here. We're going to just switch on over to audio. So this has been the final mock draft episode before the 2023 fantasy football season with special guests Theo Gremminger and Billy Muzio of playerprofiler.com. Thanks for watching.